The median 401k balance across approximately 24.5 million Fidelity account holders at the close of 2025 sits at $34,400. Meanwhile, Americans say they need $1.46 million to retire comfortably in 2026. Among households that actually have retirement accounts, already the more financially engaged half, given that 54% of American households have saved nothing at all, only 5% have crossed the $1 million threshold. Just 5%. That leaves a gap of roughly $1.4 million between what the typical saver holds and what a comfortable retirement actually demands. And the troubling part is that nearly everyone sitting inside that gap believes they are on solid ground. Here is what makes this situation genuinely worth examining. Over the past 3 years, 401k balances have grown by double digits for 3 straight years in a row. Fidelity's fourth quarter 2025 data confirms the market has been remarkably generous to retirement savers. The average 401k reached a record high of $846,400 by the end of 2025, representing more than an 11% increase from the previous year. And yet, 47% of Americans who have a retirement savings goal say they probably will not reach it. 47%. You can have a bull market running alongside a broken structural reality at the exact same time. That is precisely the situation we are in right now. Here is what this is going to cover today. Not a target number, not an inspirational talk about the power of compound interest. 3 structural tests, measurable, specific, and unsparing, that tell you whether your portfolio is genuinely above average or simply dressed to look like one. The third test, the one that comes near the end, is the one almost no portfolio is actually prepared to handle. It has nothing to do with how large your balance is. It has everything to do with what happens to that balance during the first 2 years after you stop collecting a paycheck. Most people believe the retirement challenge is fundamentally a balance problem. Accumulate a large enough number, reach that number, and retire. The entire financial services industry is built around this belief because it generates a perpetual demand for products. Bigger funds, better funds, managed accounts, alternative asset classes. The scoreboard fuels consumption, but here is the reality. Your balance is the odometer. It tells you how far you have traveled. A truly above-average portfolio is not simply one with an impressive odometer reading. It is one where the engine runs cleanly, the fuel is not leaking from the bottom, and the person behind the wheel has a strategy for the challenging road still ahead. You can have an extraordinary odometer reading and still break down 10 miles from your destination. That is the single analogy being used throughout this discussion: the odometer versus the dashboard. By the end, you will have 3 specific dashboard readings for your own portfolio, whether you like what those readings reveal or not. In a few minutes, the exact dollar cost of 1.5% in annual fees will be laid out, not a percentage, but an actual number with commas. And it will likely make you want to sit quietly with your brokerage statement for a long moment. But first, here is why the first sign matters more than almost anyone acknowledges, and why the financial industry has a very deliberate reason to keep your attention fixed on the wrong variable. Sign 1 is your savings rate. Not whether it feels like enough, but whether it clears a specific numerical threshold that Fidelity's own data, drawn from millions of participants, identifies as the dividing line between long-term portfolio winners and everyone else. A pattern plays out constantly in workplaces all across the country. It is worth walking through carefully because the numbers become striking once you place them side by side. 2 people. Same employer, same salary, same start date, same 401k plan, same investment funds. One of them reads the enrollment paperwork and sets her contribution at 15%. She has a financially difficult year and pulls back to 12% for 18 months, then restores it to 15% and adds 1% automatically each year after that. She never checks her balance. She treats it the same way she treats a utility bill. The other person sets his contribution at 6%, just enough to capture the full employer match, exactly as the enrollment form implies is appropriate. And every year he plans to increase it. Life intervenes. The mortgage, the car payments, the children. The increase never happens. 25 years later, both of them are looking at their statements on the same morning. The person contributing 6% from his own paycheck, plus 4% from the employer, for a combined savings rate of 10%, has built a balance of roughly $600,000 on a $75,000 salary with an average 7% annual return. The person saving at a 15% total rate, same employer, same funds, same return, has accumulated approximately $960,000. That is $360,000 more. Not from smarter investing, not from timing the market, from a single number entered on a form 2 decades ago that one person treated seriously and the other did not. This is not a hypothetical exercise. Fidelity's Q4 2025 data shows that the average balance for participants who have remained in the same 401k continuously for 15 years is $617,000 and $465,000 for those who have saved consistently for 10 straight years. Consistency and contribution rate, not timing or fund selection, drive those outcomes. The average total 401k savings rate hit a record 14.3% in 2025, combining employee and employer contributions. Fidelity's stated target is 15%. That means the average American is sitting 1.7 percentage points below the benchmark Fidelity itself established. Here is the reversal most people never get to hear. You think the problem is that your investment returns are not high enough. In reality, the problem is that most people are contributing at a rate that no return in history could fully rescue. If your savings rate is 8% and you are counting on 15% market returns to close the shortfall, you are asking the engine to compensate for an empty fuel tank. The tank has to be filled first. The return is simply how efficiently that fuel converts into forward progress. The psychological force at work here is the anchoring effect. When an enrollment form suggests a default contribution of 3% to 6%, the brain treats that range as the correct amount. It is not the correct amount. It is the minimum required to keep participation statistics presentable. The default is deliberately set low so that even minimally engaged employees will participate just enough to keep the numbers looking acceptable. The consequence is that millions of Americans have spent entire careers contributing at a rate that feels responsible but is structurally insufficient. Fidelity's own benchmarks recommend having the equivalent of 1 full year's salary saved by age 30, 3 times your salary by 40, 6 times by 50, and 10 times by 67. Americans in their 50s currently hold a median retirement savings balance of $438,866. If you earn $100,000, the benchmark at age 50 is $600,000. The median falls nearly 30% short of that mark. For Generation X specifically, many of whom are now within striking distance of retirement, 52% have saved 3 times their current annual income or less. And 54% of that same group believe they will not be financially ready when retirement arrives. That is not a collection of random pessimists. That is an entire generation conducting an honest assessment while staring directly at the calendar. There is also a K-shaped reality worth acknowledging here, because it explains why the headline averages feel so disconnected from what people are actually experiencing. Beneath the record average balances, Vanguard's data reveals that 6% of workers in their plans took a hardship withdrawal in 2025, up from 4.8% in 2024, and roughly 2% before the pandemic. Moving from 2% to 6% in approximately 5 years is not statistical noise. It is a distress signal hiding inside a headline that reads, "Record balances." The average is climbing. The floor is cracking beneath it. An above-average portfolio passes sign 1 by maintaining a combined savings rate, employee plus employer, of 15% or higher, consistently. Not during one strong financial year, consistently over time. If you cannot recall your current contribution rate without opening an app to check, that is a dashboard reading. Not catastrophic, but a warning light is on. Now, a specific person needs to be introduced because the second sign lands with considerably more force when it is applied to a real situation. Gary is 51 years old. He lives just outside Columbus, Ohio. He is an engineer, methodical, detail-oriented, earning $115,000 annually. He has been maxing out his 401k for 11 years. His balance stands at $480,000. From the outside, Gary looks like someone doing everything right. His financial advisor told him at their most recent annual meeting that he was on track. He went home feeling reassured, but his dashboard tells a completely different story. And it will become clear why Gary, despite passing one of the three signs correctly, has a specific and measurable structural problem that is actively costing him money every single month, and another structural gap that could ultimately determine whether his retirement holds together or falls apart. Gary is going to be revisited shortly. Everything shifts once the second sign is understood. Sign 2 is your all-in cost structure, not just your expense ratio in isolation, but everything combined. And the number needs to be expressed with commas, not as a percentage, because the percentage format is specifically engineered to prevent you from feeling the true magnitude of the cost. Consider this scenario. You are 35 years old with $100,000 in a 401k, contributing $10,000 per year over the next 30 years. The market delivers a gross annual return of 7%. An investor holding low-cost index funds at a total fee of 0.1%, earning a net return of 6.9%, grows that portfolio to approximately $1,700,000. An investor paying a combined advisor fee and fund expenses totaling 1.5%, a standard blended cost for a traditionally managed advisory account, earns a net return of 5.5% and grows the identical portfolio to approximately $1,200,000. The difference is $500,000. The fee did not cost 1.5% of your wealth. It cost $500,000. Not from a poor investment decision, not from a market crash, from a fee structure you probably agreed to in a document you did not read in its entirety. Here is why the percentage framing is so insidious. In year 1, a 1% fee on a $100,000 portfolio takes $1,000. The investor barely notices and moves on. By year 15, if gross returns have averaged 7%, the portfolio has grown to roughly $275,000. That same 1% now extracts $2,950 annually. By year 25, the pre-fee portfolio has passed $540,000 and the annual fee exceeds $5,400. The percentage never changed. The dollar amount tripled, then quintupled, because it is always calculated against a growing base. And not a single dollar of that total ever went back to work compounding for your benefit. A 1% difference in fees can mean working 5 to 7 additional years before retirement becomes possible. Not saving a bit longer, working years longer. The fee does not merely cost money, it costs time. A 1% annual fee applied to a $1 million portfolio can quietly extract more than $500,000 over 3 decades once the compounding loss is accounted for. That is $500,000 silently transferred from your future self to a management structure that, statistically speaking, produces worse performance than the index it charges you to outperform. The SPIVA report from S&P, which systematically tracks active fund performance across thousands of funds, consistently shows that over 15-year periods, approximately 85% to 90% of actively managed funds underperform their benchmark index after fees. You are paying a premium for a service that typically delivers an inferior outcome, and the industry continues selling it because most investors never run the calculation with actual dollar amounts. Think about what that means structurally. The product being sold is alpha, the promise that expert management will outperform a passive alternative by more than the fee charged. 50 years of evidence shows that alpha is not reliably delivered at scale. What is reliably delivered is the fee, every year without exception, regardless of how the market performs. Imagine hiring a contractor who charges 30% above market rate and consistently produces slightly below market results, and you hire him again every single year because his invoice is expressed as a percentage of your home's value rather than a dollar figure, and you never convert it. That is where most retail investors stand with their fund expenses. Not because they lack intelligence, but because the incentive structure of the industry is specifically designed to never show them the dollar total. An above-average portfolio carries a total all-in cost. Fund expense ratios, advisor fees, platform charges, everything combined. of under 0.5%. If you are at 0.1% or 0.2%, you are in excellent shape. Passive ETFs typically charge between 0.03% and 0.2%. Most active managers cannot reliably outperform the fee difference they charge. The low-cost tools exist and are widely accessible. The only question is whether you are actually using them. Now back to Gary. His 401k defaults include a target date fund carrying an expense ratio of 0.7%. His advisory relationship adds another 1% on top of that. All in, he is paying 1.7%. Gary has been maximizing his contributions. Sign 1 is green. But over 11 years at an average balance of approximately $400,000 with ongoing contributions, the difference between paying 1.7% and 0.2% annually compounds to roughly $110,000 in additional wealth that Gary will never see. He will likely need to work somewhere between 3 and 4 additional years simply to compensate for a fee structure that has never once been shown to him in dollar form. His advisor's annual meetings covered asset allocation, market performance, and projected retirement income. They never covered what 1.7% per year actually costs in real dollars across an 11-year runway toward retirement. This is where the standard retirement conversation breaks down. Max your 401k. Stay diversified. Stay invested. All of that advice is correct, and all of it is insufficient when you are systematically leaking wealth through a fee structure that compounds against you every single quarter. Here's something worth addressing directly. Knowing these numbers and actually building a system around them are two very different things. Having access to all of this data does not change anything until a concrete framework is built to act on it. That is why a resource called the Exit Code exists. An analysis of 50 years of retirement data distilled into a mathematical framework for determining precisely when you can stop working. Not a motivational exercise. A structured system grounded in actual historical numbers. 8 chapters of pure research with no filler. 2 components inside it connect directly to what has just been covered. The lazy portfolio strategy, which has historically outperformed active traders across 30-year windows. Exactly what the fee data tells you to use instead of a managed account. And the dynamic withdrawal method, which replaces the standard 4% rule with a flexible withdrawal system that adjusts based on prevailing market conditions, which is the structural solution to the third sign about to be explained. It is available through the link in the description for less than the cost of one dinner out. A single hour with a mediocre financial advisor costs more and explains a fraction of this material. Every year spent waiting means the compounding math works against you in a direction that cannot be reversed. Now the third sign, and this one requires the first 2 to be fully understood, because it describes a failure mode that becomes catastrophic precisely when a substantial portfolio has been built close to retirement without this one structural feature in place. Sign 3 is a sequence of return strategy. Here is the core mechanic. During the accumulation phase, while you are saving and contributing, a market crash is actually your ally. When the market falls 30% and you continue contributing every month, you are purchasing shares at a discount. Dollar cost averaging thrives in a bear market. You want more shares at lower prices. The moment you retire, that relationship inverts completely. You are now a seller. Every withdrawal requires selling shares. If the market is declining when you take your first withdrawal, you must sell more shares to generate the same dollar income. Those shares, either the ones sold at a discount, never participate in the subsequent recovery. They are permanently gone. And because your total share pool is now smaller, the recovery generates less wealth for you than it would have had you not been forced to sell. Researcher Michael Kitches, in his foundational work on sequence of returns risk, calls this the portfolio size effect. A percentage decline in early retirement, when the portfolio sits at its largest absolute value, creates a far greater dollar loss than the identical percentage decline later, after withdrawals have already reduced the base. Research by Wade Pfau estimates that approximately 77% of a portfolio's final retirement outcome can be explained by the returns experienced during just the first 10 years of retirement. Not the lifetime average, not the 30-year return. The decade you retire into determines the majority of your financial fate. Retire into a favorable sequence and your portfolio compounds on itself, sustaining withdrawals with room remaining. Retire into an unfavorable sequence. Say you stop working in early 2029 and the market falls 25% that same year, and you sell into the decline, shrink the base, and spend the following decade with a structurally compromised recovery engine. The historical example that makes this most vivid is the 1970s. The S&P 500 fell sharply in both 1973 and 1974, while inflation ran at an average of roughly 9.3% annually for nearly a full decade. A retiree beginning with a $200,000 portfolio would have watched their savings erode by approximately 30% by the end of 1974. Even though markets eventually recovered, the damage had already been done. Those early losses, amplified by ongoing withdrawals, permanently disabled the portfolio's capacity to last a full retirement. Consider two retirees who both average 5% annual returns over 20 years. Both withdraw $50,000 per year from 1 million portfolios. The only variable is when losses occur. Same average return, but a $665,000 difference in ending balance. And the portfolio that experienced the bad sequence was under serious stress by year 5. Sequence risk is most acute in the 5 years before and the first 10 years after retirement, a period sometimes referred to as the retirement red zone. During this window, your portfolio balance is at or near its peak, and losses have the maximum amount of time to compound against you. Gary, as you may recall, is 51 with $480,000, planning to retire at 62. He is 11 years from entering that red zone. His current plan is to retire, shift to a 60-40 allocation, and withdraw 4% annually. If he encounters a down market at 62, he will sell equities into that decline to fund his living expenses. Those shares will be gone permanently. He never had to do it that way, but he does not know that yet. One effective approach to managing sequence risk is maintaining a short-term reserve of low-risk liquid holdings to cover near-term expenses while avoiding the need to tap equity positions. Experts suggest holding approximately 1 year's worth of expenses, after accounting for other income sources, in cash or cash equivalents, and an additional 2 to 4 years' worth in high-quality short-duration bonds. That buffer is not an emergency fund. It is sequence insurance. It means that when the market falls 30% in year 2 of retirement, you draw from the reserve rather than your equity holdings. You wait. The shares that would have been sold at a discount remain invested and participate in the eventual recovery. The compounding base is preserved. The second mechanism is spending flexibility. Even modest adjustments, drawing 3.5% instead of 4% during a bear market, can meaningfully extend a portfolio's lifespan. Committing in advance to reducing discretionary spending by 10% to 15% during down years is not deprivation. It is structural protection that prevents temporary market pain from becoming permanent portfolio damage. The third mechanism is Social Security timing. Every year you delay claiming Social Security reduces the income your portfolio must provide, directly lowering your withdrawal rate during the highest risk window. A $1,000 monthly increase in Social Security benefits is mathematically equivalent to holding an additional $300,000 in portfolio assets at a 4% withdrawal rate. Claiming at 62 instead of waiting until 70 permanently locks in a reduced benefit, one that would otherwise grow at approximately 8% per year for every year of delay. That is a guaranteed return that no market investment can match with equivalent certainty. Most people claim early because they have not constructed the bridge, the buffer strategy that allows them to wait without depleting their savings prematurely. The standard 4% rule was calibrated for a 30-year retirement horizon, beginning at age 65 and extending to age 95. Anyone retiring earlier faces a longer withdrawal period and an exponentially greater exposure to sequence risk. The rule does not scale cleanly to earlier retirements. The math changes fundamentally. An above-average portfolio has a written answer to the following question. If the market falls 25% in year 1 of my retirement, what is my specific plan? Not stay the course. not "I have a diversified portfolio." A specific documented mechanism, cash buffer size, withdrawal rate adjustment trigger, Social Security timing decision. If you cannot answer that question clearly today, that is a red warning light on your dashboard. Now let Gary's situation come full circle with a revised dashboard. Gary switches his 401k out of the managed target date fund and into the institutional index fund equivalent available within his existing plan. His all-in fee drops from 1.7% to 0.2%. Over 11 years, that fee reduction, compounded across his growing balance, produces approximately $110,000 more in his account. At age 62, he begins building a cash buffer, 2 years of anticipated withdrawals, approximately $90,000, directed into a high-yield savings account over 5 years at $18,000 per year. He runs a Social Security timing analysis and commits to delaying his claim until at least age 68, preserving the bridging strategy. At 62, Gary retires with approximately $780,000 in his 401k, not $480,000, reflecting the fee savings, continued contributions, and compound growth, plus a $90,000 liquid reserve sitting outside the market. If the market declines in year 1 of his retirement, he draws from the buffer. His equity positions remain untouched. The compounding engine survives the sequence intact. That is what the dashboard looks like when all 3 warning lights have been addressed. Gary appeared fine from the outside. His advisor declared him on track, but the odometer and the dashboard were telling completely different stories. And only one of them actually matters when the road turns rough. Something worth naming directly is the psychology underneath all of this. Financial complacency is not a sign of ignorance. It is the natural result of a system that rewards you for checking a balance number and quietly discourages you from examining the structural details. The balance rises, you feel good, you log off. The fee quietly extracts its percentage. The savings rate stays where you set it during your first week at a job you started 15 years ago. The sequence risk remains invisible in a future that has not yet arrived. The entire architecture of the consumer financial experience is built to keep you at the odometer level. The above-average portfolio is not the product of superior intelligence or privileged market access. It is the product of making one deliberate decision to look at the dashboard, and then executing 3 unglamorous, boring things that the dashboard requires. Here are 3 practical actions, calibrated specifically to everything covered here. First, calculate the fee in dollar form this week, not the percentage. Open your statements. Locate every fee layer, advisor charges, fund expense ratios, platform fees. Add them together and express the annual total as a dollar amount. If the all-in annual cost exceeds 0.5% of your total balance, you have a quantifiable and fixable problem. Switching to a low-cost index fund inside your existing 401k can typically be completed in 20 minutes. The compounding benefit accumulates for decades. Second, raise your contribution rate by 1% right now. Not after your next raise, but now. 1% of an $80,000 salary is $67 per month. You will not notice it in your take-home pay. Over 20 years at a 7% return, it compounds to approximately $45,000 in additional wealth. Do that for 3 consecutive years and the dashboard moves from yellow to green on sign 1. Third, begin building the buffer starting 5 years before your target retirement date. 2 years of anticipated withdrawals, held in liquid instruments outside the stock market. It is not an emergency fund, it is sequence insurance. The structural protection that separates a portfolio capable of surviving a difficult decade from one that cannot. The 4% rule assumes you will not be forced to sell equities during a market decline. The buffer is what makes that assumption actually hold.